with a career
When you
path.
graduate, you get to call us by first name.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't.
We call you by nickname.
Seamus, right?
Seamus, yeah. All right, Nora.
Okay.
Work your magic.
Okay, here we go. Hello everyone. It brings me so much joy to welcome you to my full video conversation with Dr. Ed Risden and Father Jim Neilson. Father Neilson is a professor of art at St. Norbert College, and he is also a Norbertine priest. And Dr. Risden is an English professor at St. Norbert College. I've had the pleasure of having classes with both of these men, and they have honestly changed my worldview and my perspective and my academic framework and pretty much my life. I know that sounds like such a cheesy Hallmark card exaggeration, but it's so true. And this isn't just something that I've found. Many students have echoed this sentiment. So we sat down in Boyle Hall, beloved by humanities students across campus, for its fluctuating temperatures and questionable carpet choices. And we had a really candid conversation about their backgrounds, what inspires them, how they edit their works. There's a car outside that will not be quiet. How they avoid burnout, how they confront the subjective nature of the humanities, especially when that involves grading students on projects or papers. And we also dug into some pretty meaty stuff like existential crises, how they deal with the limitations of their own reach and perspective, and how they have conversations with those with whom they disagree. If you don't want to take a decent chunk out of your day to watch this, I know it's a bit long, you can take a look at my shorter video clips that will be linked down below. And if you're someone who prefers to listen rather than watch, check out my Conversationalist podcast, which will be linked in the description. And if you're someone who prefers listening rather than watching, I will be releasing a podcast component of this conversation in the coming week. Links in the description for that. And the podcast, along with just being the audio format, also include a bit more background information and research than the video clips do. Okay, we're gonna get to them in just a minute, but one other thing. If you're feeling especially charitable, feel free to give this video a like or subscribe to my channel if you enjoy these kind of conversations. Without further ado, here is a wonderful conversation with Dr. Ed Risden and Father Jim Neilson. Hello everyone, today I am in De Pere, Wisconsin, and I'm talking with Dr. Risden and Father Neilson. They're both professors at St. Norbert College. Dr. Risden is professor of English and Father Neilson of art. So thank you so much for being here.
He's a wonderful artist too.
Yeah.
He's a sage educator.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if you could just start off by talking a little bit about how you got into your career path, if that was sort of a straight shot, or if it was sort of more circuitous of a route.
I took the scenic route to get here. I truly did. I knew as a young boy I wanted to pursue this, but I was discouraged along the way from the idea of both steeping myself in the visual arts here and then ever believing that I would be an educator of the arts. And so it was that idea, would I be an artist or would you be an art educator? And being an art educator, does that compromise your ability as an artist? Is there going to be a primary focus? And so I wrestled with a sense of identity for years and years. And so it was worth it. I was actually a fourth grade teacher when I was your age. That's right. In urban Chicago. It was fantastic. You learned to improvise, and that was huge, and that was a good experience. But yeah, so I would say the scenic route is how I found myself here.
Equally circuitous, but less scenic. I took the route through the mud and the dead leaves and the swamp. It took a long time. I always had a sense from when I was small of what I wanted to do, but I had no notion that a person could do that sort of thing. And if I ever brought it up, growing up, people say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're supposed to say something like coal miner or steel worker, or maybe if you're really bold, a police officer. And I think that if they think you're really smart, maybe you can say lawyer, and then everybody will say, I knew I loved literature. But nobody had any notion that someone could do something like that. I went about it in a very desultory way, hopping from this to that and not having a good sense of where to go. And I was actually working out of undergraduate school, working in a laboratory, working with all my lab mates, and I used to quote poetry to them as we would do our experiments.
So biology?
It was a biology lab, and the person working next to me at the lab table one day got angry with me and said, "Don't you know you're not supposed to be here? You were supposed to be an English major. You're supposed to be teaching people about literature. Get out!" And she was right.
Yeah.
And I knew it, and so I finally said, "Well, I'll give that a try." Not knowing that things might reasonably work out.
Yeah, how do you take the courage to take that step? Or did you just sort of possess that, or was there someone in your life that mobilized either of you to do that?
I had two uncles who were Jesuit priests, and they were both involved in higher education, and so that combination was very affirming. As I became older, transitioning from high school to college, and then wondering a little bit after that. So they were highly influential in the following the bliss, Joseph Campbell, sort of encouragement, and I hadn't heard of Joseph Campbell or things like that, Power of Myth and those sorts of things here. And they were suggesting that to me, and that became very motivating, because that was new. But it became from very loving, incredible sources. And so that was a huge encouragement. Yeah.
Did you think about joining Jesuits?
I did. I never thought I was smart enough to be a Jesuit. Norwich didn't have to be quite as smart to do that. Yeah. I wake up sometimes wondering, because I went to a Jesuit college, as a matter of fact.
Where'd you do it?
Xavier.
Oh, yeah.
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
right? I know.
Yeah.
So, no, but I'm glad where I am.
Yeah.
Very, very, but, once bitten by the little Jesuit bug.
Little Jesuit.
Always there.
Always there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I went to a Jesuit school too, John Carroll.
Oh, fine, yeah, Cleveland, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. For me, it's rather the opposite. I got discouragement all the way. Yeah, if ever I thought of anything like that, everybody would say, "Oh, don't do that. That's stupid. You'll never get a job." So yeah, it was much the opposite response. And I think I ended up going mostly because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to come to the end of my life and not have tried to do the thing I really love doing.
That's right.
So I plunged in, not thinking there was a job there, just thinking I love to study this stuff. I want to learn whatever those people can teach me. I want to learn it.
So how did you maintain motivation along the way? Because I imagine that wasn't a super easy route. I mean, for either of you, that's my assumption, but how did you maintain that? Was there ever a time when you thought this just isn't worth it, this isn't working, or?
I never did.
You never did?
Once I got started, for me, love of subject matter took over.
Okay.
Finding a community of people who also were steeped in the arts was very important to me, and so in graduate school, we had studios that were next to each other here, and then I felt like, these are my people. Where have you been all my life? We were all living the same things that I was loving.
Yeah.
We all liked to go into the shop together here, and the school was small, and it was situated in such a way that we would share meals together, and then go back to the studio, and we were up all night, making things and swapping, things that we created. That's what a business here. So that made a huge difference, having that community. And so when we talk about that here at Seneca College here, I've got this ideal, this image of how that really works.
It worked for you.
How completely valuable it was. Yeah, and so I would say I had classmates. And it was somewhat competitive, to tell you the truth, but it was a sort of friendly competition, because you were out there and you wanted to be noticed, and you have studio visits, and critiques and things like that. And so that in itself was somewhat motivating.
That's pretty typical for artists, right?
Somewhat, yeah. That's right. That's right, because it's a competitive field out there. Gallery representation, that sort of business is one thing, to make things that only you see, and that's very romantic and dreamy. Who else doesn't do that? Right? All those precious things there. On the other hand, you want to pay your bills, and you do want to have those opportunities that afford you other options, and that sort of business. So, no, it was good. Yeah. But not discouraged, but affirmed and motivated, and sometimes disappointed if you're not chosen for a show or you're rejected for a gallery or something like that. But you find out that it's happened to the best of them, right? Often, as a matter of fact, right?
Yeah, you get accustomed to rejection, and it still hurts just as much every time.
It does,
but you know it's part of the process, and you just have to keep going. You can't let it still whatever belief you have in your interests and your abilities.
And I feel like that's not, unique to the humanities, but I think that's something that you have to deal with more, especially with the subjective nature of the humanities, and I wanted to talk to you about that, and if you've ever experienced a frustration with the editing process or not having a definite, final point when you're working on a piece of art or a piece of literature. So how do you deal with that?
You reach intermediate points that make sense to you. A project can take the books I've done. I've written a book in 3 months. I've written a book over 20 years. So it comes to fruition whenever it does. It's funny you'd say does the editing process get frustrating and how do you know when it's done? My sister just did her very first book, just published it about a little over a month ago. And she sent me an email with exactly the same question. She said, how do I know when I'm done? I have it written, I've been editing it, I've done the best job I can on it. How do I know if it's done? And I wrote back and I said, one day you decide done or not, you're sending it in. You've done what you can do on that for now. You'll send it in, you'll get the copy in your hand, you'll be so happy when it comes back. You'll find a typo in it somewhere, or you'll find a sentence you could have worded better, with a paint or a passage you could have painted a little bit differently.
Sure.
Maybe not necessarily better, but a little bit differently. But at some point you let that work go, because you realize that's part of the process. You work on that as long as you are ready and willing to work on that, and then you work on something else.
What do you think, Father Neilson?
I've learned to edit my work. I would say that I've had a consistent aesthetic, but I think I've learned some tricks, and I think I've developed maybe a style or a taste that works more often than it doesn't. In that sense, there's been some failure with experimenting with certain media that. But I enjoy that. I mean, that's actually part of the chemistry of creating something here. Is that wonderful mistake or experiments, sort of moving in a different direction. I don't mind that at all. Happy accident, right? Felix Coupa. This is what we like sometimes, and that we don't want to discount the fact that could happen. Not having that was on the radar at all, then something begins to emerge, and so make room for surprise. That's the best way to answer your questions. You'll have to edit all this other stuff out.
Yeah.
Is, you make that allowance for surprise. I suppose if this were an equation, that would be the X, right? That uncertain.
My phrase for that is let the work become what it wants to become.
Sure.
The same idea, exactly.
That's right. That's right.
And sometimes you start off thinking you're doing less than such a thing. For me, for instance, I might think I'm writing a poem, and I make a few notes, and pretty soon it starts to turn into a prose passage, right? And it wants to become an essay instead. And you just kind of have to let the thing play with it, and let it become what it wants to become.
Yeah, evolving, in a way that you hadn't imagined, and there it is. So the material, has some authority. And some
liveliness.
Yeah, liveliness. Yeah, well said. Absolutely, right.
So you're talking about with beauty
Yes.
too. Yeah, it's all connected. Well, I wonder, just from a student's perspective, I think a lot of students get frustrated with that too. They're like, how do I know if this is good or not, or what's the point of it? How do you sort of approach that with the value of studying the humanities when it's so amorphous?
Two things. You look. You never miss an opportunity to go to a gallery. And you absolutely you have to feel compelled to go out to look at other work, even if you don't want to here, because you're going to learn something, and it may percolate for a while. This is what we don't want to discount. I suppose it's true for being a good writer. You need to read, right?
Yeah.
Not that we're slavishly copying. But that we're seeing color, you're seeing texture, you're seeing form, and that sort of business here, and allowing that to percolate, right? A verb that a lot of students don't understand is seeing it now is going to reward you in the future, right?
And you don't know how.
You don't know how, no, but you have to be very consistent in going to galleries, seeing the real work here, or going online. This sort of business, that's sort of like third best.
Yeah.
in a way, but to see the real thing is really important here. And then cultivating that community that's willing to speak to you about that. I had the best advice ever from Jim Cagle, our professor here a number of years earlier. He told us in class, he goes, do not listen to your friends when they speak about your work, only listen to me. Your friends will, right? Your friends will flatter you. Your friends will flatter you. They don't know what I know, so you only listen to me. And I said, I would follow you anywhere after saying that. And of course, everybody's looking at each other and saying, oh my God, we can't talk to each other. But there was something about that, sort of acquiescing to authority, in a sense, to he or she who is the expert at that moment. And that's not to slavishly imitate them either, but to trust that part of the journey is going to be under their tutelage, their direction, their authority.
It's a fun story. It really is. I would add though, don't listen just to one. Listen to many. And listen to the critical voices and listen to the encouraging voices. Even if your friends say nice things to you because they're your friends, sometimes you need some encouragement. Sometimes that's what you need. And if they can give you that at that time, don't necessarily believe if they say that this is the best story that I've ever seen in the world that anyone has ever done, and I so love you, my friend. And that's not that. But sometimes, because as you said, one gets discouraged. And if somebody gives you encouragement at a time when you need it, that can really help. When I was just finishing up grad school, I got to meet an editor from Viking, the big publisher. They brought him into the school, and he gave a couple of lectures, and he was kind enough to meet with some of the students, and we sent him stories, and he read them. And so I had my 10 minutes with the editor, who was obviously way above my head, and I knew what I gave him wasn't very good, but it was what I could do at the time. And I went in very nervous to talk to him. So we had a nice chat for just a few minutes, and then he said, well, your story, he said, it's not very good. And he said, but it has some good things. There are good bits in it. And I said, I know it's not very good. I said, what I was hoping that you might say to me today is that you think there's enough in it that it's worth my spending some of my irreplaceable living time writing. And he said, oh yeah. He said, you're a writer. Keep at it, and it'll come one day. And if he had said anything more effusive than that, I wouldn't have believed him. It wouldn't have meant anything to me because I knew it would be wrong. But he didn't give me any false hopes for that particular piece of writing. But all I needed at that point was just for someone to say to me, you have it in you to be a writer. So if it matters to you, press on.
Do you find that you're consistently inspired, or do you enter these droughts where you just can't, you don't have ideas percolating, or that's pretty baseline, but I mean you don't have an idea of a project you want to work on, or how do you deal with that?
I have a million things that I want to do. There's no shortage. There are other things that I'm obligated to do that inhibit that possibility, and that becomes frustrating. But there is no shortage of things that I'd like to explore, investigate, begin to do, pick up and start experimenting, or just find myself in the presence of the materials, and with nothing but just to absorb whatever is going on with that. But finding it's time. So much of studio work, as I'm sure it is with writing here, is time dependent. I mean, I can't be looking at the clock. I can't be. If I'm thinking that I have an appointment in an hour, that will inhibit the process, because I'll be more concerned with being mindful of tick, 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 rather than just, that was the luxury of graduate school, is that there were no clocks. Where I was, in Vermont there, it was land with no time. And people rolled with that, and that was the expectation. And it took me a week to get used to it because you're so regimented here. That is what I think destroys creativity. And so there, all of a sudden, I'm just, it's a different experience.
Yeah, the environment that you poor students are in all the time doesn't foster your creativity. It puts lock after lock on your time, and strain after strain on your psyche, and that's not what you need. But I'd echo exactly what Father Jim said about, I have no shortage of ideas. In my 20s, I had vague notions, and no strong sense yet of where to go with them. But by the time I hit about 30s, I remember reading Stephen Crane's letters. Remember Stephen Crane?
Vaguely.
American fiction writer, and actually better poet too than most people realize. Red Badge of Courage. He was writing in a letter that he had just got to the point as a writer where he could turn the creativity on or off like a spigot. And I thought, wow, wouldn't that be the place to get to? Where if there's the time constraint you know you have to deal with, you can do it at that time. But when you're ready, you turn it on and it flows. And you know, it took me till I got in my 30s before that started to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, but now there's no shortage of things. I could fill a dozen lifetimes with work and still have plenty of other spots to follow.
So where do you draw that inspiration from? Is it just from everything? Is it hard to like even put a name on it, or is it from specific sources, do you think?
It might have been specific sources when I was younger. I mean, there would be reliable places to be inspired. That sort of business museum, would be an obvious choice here. But as you get older, you begin to recognize, that beauty is speaking to you constantly, continually, wherever you might be. And all right, St. Norbert College, I mean, this is an epicenter of inspiration in so many ways. On any given moment, any given day, that sort of business here. And so the snobbery of the feeling I could only work if I were in Paris or New York. When I was 20, I thought that's what you had to do, right? I'm never going to succeed unless I'm working in New York or in Paris, or else I'm not an artist here. And at Sleepy Little Pier, I mean, this really animated my creativity and my whatever minor success I've enjoyed within this vocation, right? So absolutely.
It just takes awakeness to what's out there.
Oh wait, there it is. That's beautifully said, as usual. That's right.
That's why they made me.
I've been writing this down.
I know.
I'm a student here.
Everybody's like taking
said
notes.
this,
There are all sorts of things. I'll have a student stop in just on any particular day in the office and just say something like, I was walking across the campus today, and I passed somebody who just had the most beautiful scarf on, and I can't stop thinking about that scarf and the way the colors went together and against the backdrop of the trees and the light filtering through in bits and spots, and I just can't stop thinking about that, and I got to write a poem about that. But the bad thing is then immediately on getting that inspiration, the person has to dash off to class. Then you got the reading you need for tomorrow, you got the paper due on Monday, you got your economics report to write up, and you don't get to just go then and do it. And it's sad because that person is getting the inspiration right then and just isn't quite in a life position to be able to make the most of it, which is too bad.
I tell my students this apocryphal story about Leonardo da Vinci, who had this alleged reputation for following people through the streets of Florence here because the way the light might have fallen on the cheek or something like this, or this particular velvet that the person might be wearing, or the cut of the garment, and he couldn't stop thinking. And today we would call that a stalker, right? He was creeping on me. But here he recognized this bit of beauty, and it was irresistible. It would have been impossible to not follow. To not want to trail that, to not want to burn that into his memory, and then recreate that somehow, or recall that. And so, wherever one might be, right? Who's the Humans of New York? The photographer.
Yeah, Brandon, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Here, the same sensibility here.
Yeah.
Finding inspiration, beauty, surprise, delight, wonder, and all on the streets. Right? And then he has a UN, knocking on his door to document, peoples of the world. And so there it is. I mean, he literally gets on the street. I mean, he's sitting on the street and he's posturing on the street to get these shots here. Yeah, so, all right. Brandon Stanton. This is
There's another piece of it, too, besides the inspiration that's really, really important. And a story comes to mind that I think is in Giorgio Vasari, The Lives of the Painters. And I think it's in the life of Giotto, if I remember right. And there's a lord who wants a painting made. Excuse me, and he sends his servant around all the various famous painters to get samples to find out whom he'll contract to do that painting. And he says, especially make sure you go see Giotto, because people say a lot of good things about him. So the servant sees a number of different artists and gets samples. And finally, he finds Giotto, who is working in his painting studio at the time, working on something. And he goes up, and the servant can hardly get Giotto's attention even. And he says, "Well, my lord," and it gives the name, his famous, wealthy, influential person, "I would like you to do a painting for him. Can you give me a sample or something to take?" So Giotto rips off a page, sets it down, takes his paintbrush, and with one flick of his wrist, makes a perfect circle. And he hands that to the servant. He says, "Take that back to your master. If he has any sense, you'll come back to me for the commission."
Yeah.
So that's it.
Yeah.
The servant takes it back, really worried, thinking he's going to get a beating from the master for not having any better sample than that. So he goes through all the other samples, and finally the master says, or his lord says, "Well, don't you have one from Giotto?" He says, "Well, yeah, you're not going to like it." And he shows him, and the lord does start to get angry at him. And he says, "Well, did he say anything when he did that?" And he said, "Yeah." He said it was remarkable. He said all he did was flash off a piece of paper, a flick of his wrist, and hand that to me. And he said, "If your lord has any sense from that, that's all he needs to know, and he'll send you back." And the Lord got it when he said, "Okay, he can do that." That's the person with technique, and technique is the other thing. You got to have the inspiration, but you got to have the technique to know how to do what you want to do with the inspiration. How do I take it from up here and put it on there? And the technique you get from labor, practice, and some successes, and lots of failures, and lots of play, and lots of time.
Well, familiarizing yourself with the masters, with those who have gone before you that have received acclaim, are those people who we look to as the true master artists, that sort of business. Michelangelo, as a boy, found himself in chapels, looking at the sutures work, and frankly, actually, his drawings were beautiful, as a boy, and so he's not only copying, he's interpreting, and so there's the mark of genius, right? Because anyone can be taught to copy, but to interpret, that's altogether different. Right?
One of the most remarkable things I remember from my first visit ever to Florence was you're already from Rome and any number of cities to see wonderful Michelangelo works. But then as you go around town, you see, well, here's an unfinished Michelangelo, and here's an unfinished Michelangelo, and here's an unfinished Michelangelo. He went through any number of big pieces of stone, and they came out not what he wanted.
Yeah.
And he just had to keep making them until he got what he wanted. Part of it, too, is finding media you can work in. Some people can work in many media. My wife's an artist,
That's right.
and she works in any number of different media comfortably, although painting is her favorite. But you look for the ones that work for you, and they may not be the ones you think. Like our friend J.R.R. Tolkien, who we love so much, he really wanted to be a poet.
Oh, okay.
And his poetry is okay. It's better when it's lines for songs.
Yeah.
When it's just poetry for poetry, it's kind of okay, but not really, really great. But as a storyteller, as a creator of a world, he was marvelous, as good as the 20th century saw. So for him, it was a matter of continuing to find the medium that worked for him, where his techniques worked best.
Michelangelo was famous for saying that I'm no painter, because I'm no painter, right? That false modesty. But that's and so literally he's sculpting the Sistine Chapel ceiling with paint. So vibrant, so fleshy, so embodied here. So what he was denied the ability to do, he sort of recreated with watercolor, essentially, because it's his fresco, so watercolor and wet plaster, and hasn't been bested, right? But marble was like butter in his hands. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, although sometimes the stick of butter you get just isn't as good as you hoped it would be.
Right.
That's the thing you don't know until you get inside it.
Yeah. So I wonder if we could talk about sort of like extending outside of the humanities more culturally. Right now, obviously, it feels like divisions are pretty deep among just people in general. That's a kind of a gross overgeneralization, but from my standpoint, that's what it seems. And I'm wondering what you think the role of art, literature, just the humanities in general, is in creating connections between people.
we have art, we have painting to make up for what words can't provide in a certain sense. Because if we could say it all, there'd be no reason to paint it. That's what it is, right? And so it exists as its own, but it also exists in tandem with the word, right? And so I would say that's a very legitimate and necessary form of communication, articulation of truth, of desire, of hope, of longing, and that sort of business. And we certainly don't want to dismiss that voice, that communication from occurring. And so we need to rely on that and cultivate that to work in tandem with all the other ways that we can communicate. Poetry and prose and any number of other, just righteous, sound, that sort of business as well.
Disciplines are ways of knowing and ways of producing. And the reason we have any number of different disciplines, academic disciplines, comes from the fact that we have different ways of knowing and making. All of them have value. All of them have virtue.
Right.
If one does them with commitment and joyfulness, they're all wonderful. And for me, in a sense, there's no distinction then, because all of that, a person devoted to any of them can have that and can use that. What we don't want to miss, I think, is that joyfulness. And if you can find a way to get that, to reach that point, to get yourself into that state of mind, you can find it in any discipline that you pursue. It's maybe a little bit easier to find in music, in art, in writing a poem, in listening to a poem, but it's there. You'll hear mathematicians talk about the elegance of a formula. You'll hear the physicists talk about the elegance of a construct, a vision of the atom, a vision of the universe. And they are seeing the same thing. They are seeing the beauty in it. And it brings them joy. It brings them transportation from the simple state of quotidian living into some higher order of feeling and understanding, at least for a little bit of time. And we believe that the arts provide really good means to do that, and that's why we value them so much. But I think all disciplines provide that in their way. But we just hope, we aim to try to help students find their way to that experience. So I would never say, if a person says, well, I don't think really the study of literature is so much for me. I find it in psychology and my working my way through how to help patients with psychological issues feel better and live some kind of life. So it's great. It's just as great. It's the same thing. I'm sorry if literature doesn't work for you, because literature is an awfully good way to joyfulness too.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, that doesn't so much matter. You have to find the one that works for you, or the two or the three that work for you, and live in them and live through them and live beyond them.
And that's sort of the key to mending those deficiencies, do you think?
I do.
Yeah, joyfulness.
Joyfulness.
Hearing you speak at, on Thursdays, I teach at the maximum security prison here at the Green Bay Correctional Institute. Yeah, it's a class on essential identity. It's through a restorative justice program. And for 3 hours, it allows them to have an opinion, because in a situation like that, an opinion is something that is also incarcerated. It doesn't matter what you think here. You've got to do this, and so we can control the situation. But within this classroom, by showing them images that I've curated, that address topical themes here, they're able to create their own narratives and express opinions, keeping the wheels turning, which is a good thing. But this is all roundabout to get to your point here. What they love more than anything is poetry. And I think how inspired they might be by someone like yourself coming in there with the area of expertise that you have to encourage and help them recognize what it is that they long for, because bar none, this is the art form that they say they rely most on and are most interested to hear. And I can only give them a few things.
It's maybe the most visceral.
The most visceral, so there it is.
To
Right?
to make a painting, to make a sculpture, takes days, weeks, months, sometimes more. Whereas a poem can come out almost by accident in an instant.
And you have to worry about storing it. I mean, you're storing it here and here, right? I mean, when you have these other three-dimensional objects, where are you going to put them, if you're allowed to keep them at all? But with the poem, the storage space for that is different, right? Than the painting, the sculpture, the object, right? And so that's off camera. We're gonna have to speak about this.
Off the record.
It would be a matter of enabling, right? Of getting to the person and saying, say what you have to say. Let it pour out. In this instant, you don't have to stop it. Let it come out. And then once it does, then we'll deal with it. But get it out first. Say it in the words that come to you. That may not be it quite yet, because it's hard to say. This is something we talk about in classes every now and then. It's actually really hard to say what you think or what you feel.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that just comes out.
Yeah.
Because the thought is often a little bit vague, the feeling a little bit vague.
Yeah.
So to put it down and get it exactly the way you want, and then get it in to a shape that someone else can think or feel too, is hard. But you can only do that if first you get something out, something to work with. So you've got to let. It's an ugly image, the disjecta membra of the soul come out, and it isn't quite that. But the ebullience, maybe, of it, let it boil out first, and then try to find a shape for it.
For a number of years, I was the audio tapes, the long trips, back and forth between Green Bay and graduate school, that sort of business here. And I love more than anything hearing the author, him or herself, reading their own work. And I first discovered this in, what was it, Maya Angelou. Her voice, because I had read her poems, but until I heard her,
it's way different, isn't it?
Way different. So I think that's even that other source of richness, with poetry or written artistry, that sort of business here, because it's about inflection and tone, all that sort of business here, and from the creator, him or herself. Would you say that's it's more than just essential. Nuancing it? It's there's something about that gives it authority.
Yeah, especially more recently. Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit freer sense that really delivering a poem is an okay thing. That you don't have to be, this is my poem, and I'm so embarrassed that I wrote it, but I'm going to speak it out anyway. Mm-hmm. But I'll speak it really quietly, so nobody has to feel bad about it. Right. No, you got to let it. Let it come to vocal being. But poetry is an oral art for the ear, not for the eye. If go back into the Middle Ages and the whole notion of reading silently, no one had ever thought of it. Mm-hmm. Even in libraries, people would go in and open a book and read aloud. Augustine speaks of that. Right? Because the feel of the word in your ear and the feel of the word in your mouth as you speak it, it's like chewing on a sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
It's the words are they have to come to full sensual embodiment, sensory embodiment to get the whole of that work. And when you hear somebody who's really good at reading her own work like that, the real revelation for me was Gwendolyn Brooks. I had always liked her poetry, but when I finally got to hear her read, it was like listening to an expert alto saxophone player, working it. So you get the words plus the music, and I had an out-of-body experience when I heard that. Because it gave me the element of poetry that I always knew was there, but I would have been too shy to get at yet.
You would know this better than anyone, I think, but I seem to recall hearing, so many decades ago in college, a professor once saying that Shakespeare was never meant to be read, it was meant to be heard and seen. What do you think about that? Did Shakespeare imagine that people would be reading his plays or experiencing them visually
it's a tough
and orally?
One. The sad thing is we don't have any notes from Will himself about that.
No.
That's I call him that because that's what he called himself.
Yeah.
So if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. The plays he meant to be heard and to be played out. But he also wrote sonnets and 2 long poems, which somebody probably would have spoken, and yet he sent them. We have records from people at the time who say he sent them in written copies to his friends. And the friends would probably look at the page and read them out, speak them out, rather than read them silently. But so to me, it's both. It's all those things, because if he didn't intend us to read them on the page, how is it they read so darn well? And
Well-
because they do. They
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
They play well on stage. They read. Well, one of the most wonderful things to do, and I wish we did this, and some of the faculty have talked about doing this now and then, is I'd like us to have a regular series of just staged readings of Shakespeare. You don't have to spend money on costumes and sets. You get a little cast together, you go through the play a couple times, and then you put up a little semicircle of chairs and you invite in anyone who wants to come in. You have some coffee and tea, and
Oh, that's a really nice idea.
and you read
Yeah.
and you read the play, and
Yeah.
it works. It absolutely works.
I
It's
love
just as good as seeing it on stage because it comes to life. It absolutely comes to life. You know, the characters, the actors, if you get good readers, they play their characters, and the characters come to life for you, and you can, and they grunt and they sweat and they scream, and so you can envision the movement of the actors on a stage.
But I think there's a double dividend with that, because I think I would relate to somebody differently when I'm passing them on campus, having just read with them. You know, because you're part of this experience, you're part of this relationship or this history. I don't know that I would think that would be a source of bonding for people. Don't you think so?
Yeah. Well, if you and I read Prince Hal and Falstaff together, you know, we never look at each other quite the same way when we pass a wave on campus again, because
Will rules.
You do. Partly. I hate to say rules. Lives.
Lives, yeah.
Lives. Let's say that. Yeah. And I think it wouldn't have to be just even with Shakespeare. There's so many dramatic pieces that one can read that way, that come to life when they come through a live person's mouth and to a live person's ear. And your imagination still works. It just adds that sensory input. And not that staging plays isn't wonderful. I'm so glad we do that. It's just more expensive.
Sure.
And more time consuming. Whereas you could do a staged reading with a week's notice and a couple practices and just enough time to tell people you're doing it so that they'd come and
Yeah.
And it gives more actors more experience too. So a lot of acting also is learning how to say the lines.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
You recognize you might be an actor. You know, that could be your first experience of claiming your voice or your imagination, right?
Yes. Might make a poet out of you. Might make an artist out of you.
Could be, right.
Might make a musician out of you. Might just make a kinder person out of you. Which is pretty good too.
So I have this is sort of changing direction a little bit, but just about your own perspectives, I find that I struggle with the smallness of my impact and what I can do, and sort of like the the smallness of my existence overall. And I wonder how you overcome that, fight feelings of like apathy that you might have, and go out and work positively and work with energy. Did you ever encounter those feelings, or was that not something that you ever struggled with?
About 2 hours ago.
Is that making sense to anybody? Am I the only one interested in this topic right now?
Not 2 hours ago, because we had such a lovely class.
Yeah.
But all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Because you're always only going to be one person. And any one person is just a little being in the great shape of things. But on the other hand, you are one. And you have your talents, and you have your being, and you have your life to live. And it matters just as much as everybody else's does. And it's the one you have. And so I think what you search for is, I don't know, this is being too overbearing probably. If one seeks to have an impact, then you're insisting someone else respond to you in a certain way. Whereas instead, if you find that space of joyfulness and live in that, then you're much more likely to have an impact. But when you do, it will happen because people choose for it to happen for them too, rather than one's own efforts trying to force them into it. Yeah, you remember we just read Lord of the Rings, so I'm sorry about all the Tolkien allusions, but the problem is Sauron, who wants to control. The help comes from Gandalf, who wants to free. And that's the difference. So if all the things we do aim at freeing ourselves, and what we aim to do is help others free themselves and not to control them, then at least we're never doing anything wrong. And the chance of helping is way, way greater.
Something that sustains me is every now and then I'll receive out of the blue a postcard from a museum or a gallery of a former student, and that will sustain me for the entire semester, is that I remember seeing this, or you mentioned this, that's a little trophy for me. Those are something that I keep. I mean, I'm not a collector in a certain sense of too many things, and I'm not looking, I'm not asking them to feed these things to me, but when that occurs, I can't tell you, that's euphoric. That's an affirmation that I am where I ought to be, if there's such a way of thinking that way. And it really, and I mean it when I can say it will completely sustain me. That one little postcard from that. So,
yeah, somebody got somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody did something that he wanted to do. It's lovely.
Oh, yeah. So the last question I have for you is just what we were talking about before, the divisions and how to mend those.
Sure.
How do you approach conversations or interactions with people when you have really differing beliefs from them? And how do you sort of check your own internal biases in that? Because I think that's something I try to work on. But this environment kind of cultivates a certain mentality, then you meet people from a completely different environment, and you don't even realize how deep-seated those biases are. So what do you think about that?
I'm always on the quest for the common denominator. I'm always thinking, about archetypal images. I mean, what was the essence of the form? That's what it is here. And so we're trying to look underneath, or to peel back the layers, that sort of thing, particularly with signs and symbols in the visual arts, because we do want to I think, find those common denominators when in fact something may look so species specific, to a time or to a community of people, that it would not be accessible by anyone else. And I want to suggest that we have more in common than we might think. And so I try to be very careful in curating images here that allow that to be realized, on varying levels of recognition, in the hopes that might stimulate that thought in other circumstances, where they might take that principle, that idea, and apply it. Because I'm so smart, right? I'm not a Jesuit, so I'm not that smart.
Not quite Jesuit level.
Yeah, truly Jesuit logic. So I think that's part of the strategy, because I agree, because one of the, what do I want to say, ways that art works is to allow us to recognize that we have common denominators, I think, or that we have shared narratives, similar interests in things, whatever those great things are, right?
Yeah.
So.
You just asked, to me, that's a wonderful answer. One of the hardest questions I think you could ask.
Yeah.
How'd it go, Nora?
Yeah.
that makes it though a really important one to ask, and I don't have really good strategies for that. I very much like Father Jim's idea of sharing stories, sharing images, finding common ground, but that takes willingness from both sides.
Yeah.
To do that, you have to be able to engage to begin with. So I'm embarrassed to say, as far as I know, I only really have two techniques.
I know this is the most inconvenient spot to butt in, but I kid you not, the video camera cut off at this exact moment. Literally, Dr. Risden was like, I have two solutions for this. And then right as he said that, it cut off. So I will be supplementing this part of his answer. We have the audio from it with some captions, and here it is.
So I'm embarrassed to say, as far as I know, I only really have two techniques for this. And one is just asking questions instead of talking to myself. Just if there's someone with whom I really can't find any, you sit down next to somebody on the airplane and you realize that person's views on things are just antithetical, but that person's going to talk to you for the next hour and a half, regardless of what you do.
Yeah.
So my way to make that person feel a little bit more at peace or a little bit more comfortable is, I say, you were showing me that picture of your kids. Tell me about your kids. What are they doing now? You just ask them a bunch of questions and try to get them on some level of comfort, and hope that it helps them break a boundary instead of make a boundary. But beyond that, my way is to shut up and go away as soon as I can.
Okay.
Because I do find there are times when I'm not going to be able to do any good. So rather than do no good, I just try to do no harm and be quiet, get out of the way. That's I know that seems like giving up, but to me it isn't really giving up. It's just knowing that all I can do in the present is make the situation worse. Sorry, that's not a very good answer, but it's an honest one.
No, that's very honest. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Do you know David Tracy? He's a theorist at the University of Chicago.
don't.
He's also a Catholic priest. He wrote about the analogous imagination, and that changed my entire pedagogy. This whole thing, knowing something by seeking similarities rather than its differences. And he goes, this is a strategy for discerning, great truths everywhere. The analogous imagination.
T.S. Eliot calls it objective correlative.
It's
the same notion exactly.
Thank you very much for watching. Check out the links in the description of this video for more information about where you can find The Conversationalist, and I'll speak to you soon.